Hey guys, I'm gonna share a little bit about some hard baits and moving baits for summer river smallmouth. Um, these are by and large, hard baits can be great for covering water, especially if you're trying to find new spots or you want to kind of test the waters a bit. Oftentimes, we don't get a whole lot of time to fish, so we can't really sit and dissect each and every spot. And but if we can cover water quickly, then that can help us pick what spots we want to slow down and break apart with some of those techniques I've already mentioned. Um, so that being said, first one I'm going to talk about. Um, these are super popular on my local river. The reason for that is that these are some of the loudest baits as far as topwaters go. And for me, the purpose of that is that when you have really fast moving water and a disturbed surface, that noise is actually able to reach those fish that are hunkered down behind the boulders and on the bottom. And that bait is going to be a whopper plopper. I will be honest, I am not the world's biggest topwater fisherman. Quite a few people know that about me. But I know multiple people who've caught 5+ pound smallmouth in the middle of summer grinding a topwater through quick eddies on the local river. The downside to this bait is I think the fish get wise to it pretty quickly. That's why I'm not a bigger fan of it. But that being said, if you come into an area that big old smallmouth has just moved into this spot, or maybe it hasn't been pressured very much, and you whip this bad boy in there and grind it through the faster part of that seam, I think you stand a chance to catch a really big one if you stick to it. So these can definitely catch big fish. They're just not as high of a percentage bait as some of these other ones. I think some of these other ones get a lot more bites, but that being said, I've known quite a few people to catch 5+ pound summer smallmouth on this bait right here. So, anywho, but yeah, it's really simple to fish. You cast it out there, just grind it through that seam. One other creative technique you can use this for, if you were to like anchor up in an eddy, if you were to cast at that upstream and then let it float along, and every once in a while you give it a little rip, that's a unique way to fish it that can maybe update or upgrade your number of bites. But yeah, great search bait. Just not as high of a numbers bait as some of these other ones here. But it's super popular and for good reason. The next one I'm going to talk about, this is my absolute favorite crankbait for summer river smallmouth. And that is the Spro rock crawler. Now, the reason why I like this guy so much is because you can see I rubber band my hooks together so they don't get tangled up in my tackle box. The reason I like this so much is because this dives down really good, and as the name implies, the Spro rock crawler, 55 specifically. This is advertised to get down around 14 feet. I'm pretty sure I have ground it down to like 17 feet on a long cast. But the awesome thing about this is how well it deflects off of cover. And for me, I'm going to just grind that down until I feel it hit a rock. Then I'm going to stop and let it flow back up for less than a second. And then grind it back down and then hit a rock, let it float up. And typically, you're going to get bites either when it hits that rock and deflects, or you're going to get bites on the pause. And but that's probably my number one search bait for summer river smallmouth. I've caught lots of big fish on this. they're kind of spendy, but they are worth every penny in my opinion. And if you incorporate that technique of just grinding it down, and then once you feel it hit a rock and you pause it, it'll float up out of the structure. So you're going to lose a lot fewer crankbaits that way too. But I like this a lot more than I like throwing a topwater because it's actually getting down to the fish. So I feel like I have a much stronger chance of um, hooking up good. The next one, so this is going to be really deadly in some of those bigger eddies that get more of the back eddy, and you do get some of those fish that aren't necessarily only hanging out in the current, or especially in the mornings and evenings, and that is a jerk bait. So this is a really cheap one. It's a Shadow Wrap Deep Diver. As far as jerkbaits go, that's pretty inexpensive. This is my favorite. That's a Lucky Craft Pointer Deep Diver. These are a little harder to come by. They're a little more expensive, but the idea behind these is that if you cast it out, you can fish it into the current. It's just rip, pause, rip, pause, and you can vary that up. It can be one rip, 2 rip, 3 rips. I kind of switch between that. I don't really go for 4 or more. And then if you are gonna fish this in current, you're probably going to want to pick up line faster. If you're fishing it in the slack water, it can work great too. But this can be a great way to get a lot of bites. Fish, smallmouth especially, love to respond to a jerkbait. I've caught a lot of big fish on these. And this stuff's a little more straightforward, so I'm not going into as much detail. Even if you were floating along, cast in some slower water and casting in eddies, I think these have a really high chance of getting you a lot of bites, as well as that rock crawler. I'm gonna talk about this guy for a second. The secret's out on these. When these came out, we tried our damnedest to keep these secret. This is a Dark Sleeper from Megabass. Z-Man also makes a Gobius. I'd really like to try that one because they're made out of that Elastec. But the thing that I really like about these is that they really, that shape there does not get stuck very easily. But that Goby profile does a really good job of imitating sculpin. The only downside to these is due to their hydrodynamics, they fall really slow compared to their weight. And with that being said, when it comes to river current fishing, I try and go for some of the heaviest ones I can get my hands on, like that 3/4 1 ounce size. You can see that guy's just been beat to piss, and these work great. It's hard for me to talk about this, but the downside is that they don't work quite as good in that heavy current. So if you are going to throw it into that current, you're probably going to want to throw it way upstream and pick up line, a lot of line as it's falling to the bottom, because that current's going to sweep it a long way before it hits the bottom and gets to the strike zone. But that can be a great option as far as a search bait for summer smallmouth. This is the last one I'm going to talk about for this video here. By and large, some people like their lipless crankbaits. Some people like they're great big deep divers. I find that lipless crankbaits get hung up really easily in that heavy current and chunk rock. But one last one I wanted to throw out there, since smallmouth are so heavily keyed in on bait fish, even in the summer. is just some kind of spook or walking bait. This is actually a hidden. I guess this is a one knocker spook. This guy is kind of one of the original spooks, but a spook or a walking bait, you have to practice your, walk the dog cadence on the surface. Where you're doing a down, a little rip, pickup line, and you have to learn how to. You have to practice. Oops, I got that guy stuck good. You have to practice that quite a bit, but these make it pretty easy. And then that bait is just doing that on the surface. And once again, you can cast that out into the current and do a couple rips, and let it sit for a second, marinate in that current, and kind of work it all the way back. But that could be another fun topwater. It's just a fun time of year to be throwing topwater and enjoying fishing anyway. So might as well have some of those in there. I know these are especially popular in kind of the reservoirs, reservoir stretches of river. To me, that's really gonna come into play in places where there might be like a point or an outcropping. But in that summer heat, the hotter it gets, the more likely it's gonna be a morning or an afternoon bite with these topwater baits. But like I was saying, with that whopper plopper, if it's in the heat of summer, just get into the heaviest eddy you can see and just grind that thing through. And a lot of people do just fine doing that too. But so that's about it for summertime, river smallmouth search baits. And this is a pretty short video, but I feel like it's a little more straightforward. Most people are used to hucking and winding, floating with the current, and you can try these things, anchoring up in those eddies. I'd be a little leery of doing that with this guy, that crankbait. But, the other thing you can do is if you can position your boat in the seam between the current and the back eddy, and if you cast, directly upstream with any of these baits, really, you can enjoy some bigger bites and more fish and whatnot, without getting too many of these things snagged, and kind of enjoying the best of both worlds. But at the same time, you can float down the river and use these no problem. These are a lot more user friendly than some of the bottom contact baits. So I think that's about all I'm gonna waste your time with on these anyway. So thanks for watching. One last thing I wanted to share on that topic, of these hard baits and moving baits is, I don't know that I put enough emphasis on the fact that, for me, those are more of search baits. And so, if I know where the fish are, if I have a good idea of, where some big fish are, I don't really mess around with the hard baits too much. I'm usually using more of that technical bottom contact stuff. But if I'm just trying to learn new spots on the river, search for greener pastures or whatever, or oftentimes if I'm taking people fishing and we're just floating along, we might use some of this stuff. But really for me, this is about covering water and trying to find areas where bigger fish may be holding. But if I have a good idea that I have a really good spot, I really prefer to pick it apart with those, slower moving bottom contact baits. But that being said, these are a lot of fun, and you can still catch really big fish on them. And, I've heard of people catching great big fish on those whopper ploppers. I haven't really gotten that many big bites on it myself, but, those crankbaits and jerkbaits have done really well on. I get a lot more bites on those, so that's why I stick to those anyway. And then those that dark sleeper and those goby style baits do really good too. I've absolutely caught a lot of big smallmouth on those. So, anywho, I just wanted to put a little more emphasis on that. But thank you guys. Have a good one.